The whole science around mummification is great because we can learn not only about their DNA, but Egyptian look like it's very interesting because we have all these burials and all these mummies.
For centuries, Egypt's royal bloodline has been wrapped in grandeur and mystery. But what if the DNA preserved inside ancient mummies tells a story that challenges the official history taught worldwide? Despite major advances in genetic science, critical findings about the true origins of the pharaohs have remained unpublished for more than a decade. Why would a nation withhold genetic evidence from its own kings? And what could that silence reveal about foreign influence, hidden ancestry, and a past that refuses to be rewritten, at least for now? The DNA study that raised questions. In 2010, the world was introduced to what many believed would be the definitive scientific breakthrough in understanding Egypt's royal lineage. Scientists published a study analyzing DNA from 11 mummies, including well-known figures like Tutankhamun and members of the 18th dynasty. Headlines hailed the research as the long-awaited key to unlocking the mysteries of Egypt's most famous pharaohs. The study confirmed family relationships, mapped genetic diseases, and promised answers to questions Egyptologists had debated for decades. Yet, beneath this scientific triumph lay a layer of secrecy and control. The study was conducted exclusively in Egyptian laboratories, using equipment within the country and under strict supervision from Egyptian authorities. International researchers involved in the project had limited access to the actual remains and no control over how samples were collected or processed. More disturbingly, the raw genetic data were never released to the public or shared with outside laboratories for verification, a step considered essential in transparent scientific research. Without this independent verification, doubts about the study's completeness and accuracy began to emerge. In genuine research, especially studies with claims that reshape history, raw data publication is a cornerstone. It allows other scientists to review findings, attempt their own analyses, and confirm or challenge conclusions. That openness creates trust and credibility, but with the Egyptian authorities withholding the full data, these safeguards were absent. The published results focused heavily on disease markers and immediate family ties. It confirmed Tutankhamun had malaria and a bone disorder, and that his parents were siblings, details that fit comfortably into Egypt's accepted narrative. There was nothing overtly controversial or disruptive. At the same time, the most pressing question outside scientists asked, where did this royal family actually come from, was left deliberately unaddressed. The data needed to answer this existed, but the official study sidestepped it. This avoidance was by design. The Egyptian team limited their scope strictly to genealogical and medical questions, explicitly excluding any broader ancestry or population genetics analysis. This choice set a boundary between what was explored and what was off-limits. By focusing on safe topics like disease and family ties, the study gave the public just enough insight to feel satisfied while leaving the deeper mysteries untouched. Despite the global anticipation, there was no follow-up research. No independent or even expanded studies were allowed. Requests from top genetic labs worldwide for additional access and new analysis were repeatedly denied. Technology had advanced since 2010, making deeper ancestry studies easier and less invasive. Yet Egypt refused to let anyone dig further. Why would a country block efforts to illuminate the past of its own royalty? The silence set in and has persisted for over a decade. The more scientists pushed for transparency, the more doors closed. What the DNA from these ancient pharaohs really revealed went far beyond confirming familial ties or diseases. It exposed a story Egypt seemed determined to keep hidden. The answers linger in the samples Egypt controls, but refuses to share, leaving the world to wonder what is truly buried beneath all the linen and stone. Between these tightly sealed studies and the mummies themselves, another layer of mystery rests in a surprising ancestor whose presence challenges assumptions about royal blood. Limits set by Egyptian authorities. Egypt's approach to managing royal DNA research has been defined by strict limitations boundaries that that extend well beyond scientific reasoning. From the outset, Egyptian authorities designed the 2010 study to keep certain questions off the table. The genetic analysis focused solely on family relationships and medical conditions, explicitly excluding ancestry comparisons with broader populations. This was not because technology or expertise was lacking. It was a clear, premeditated restriction imposed before any samples were tested. This limitation became a powerful means of narrative control. By refusing to include population genetics, Egypt prevented the study from revealing genetic connections to foreign groups across Africa, the Mediterranean, the Levant, Mesopotamia, or Anatolia. Comparisons with these regions could have exposed migration patterns or ancestral origins that might contradict the traditional story of a purely Egyptian royal lineage. Despite having the DNA already extracted, no one was allowed to examine these wider genetic ties. When questioned, Egyptian officials framed this boundary as respecting the medical and genealogical nature of the study, insisting that exploring the anthropology or broader origin was outside its goals. But this distinction is misleading. The same DNA used to trace inherited diseases and family ties also contains clear markers of geographic ancestry. Separating medical analysis from ancestry is like ignoring half the story, a deliberate blind spot to avoid uncomfortable revelations. Without access to the raw genetic data, international scientists could not verify if the published findings were accurate or selectively presented. No independent laboratory worldwide has been allowed to reanalyze the sequences or question the conclusions. This level of control over every step, from sample collection to analysis and data sharing, is highly unusual in global research and significantly reduces confidence in the study's completeness. The official explanation for withholding data also invoked cultural concerns, suggesting that sharing genetic information would violate the sanctity of the royal remains. However, this reasoning conflicts with the visible treatment of those remains. Exhibited in glass cases to millions of tourists each year. Technology today allows non-invasive or minimally destructive sampling, yet access remains blocked, not due to scientific or ethical limits, but political decisions. Throughout the years, Egypt has offered varying excuses for rejecting new studies, ranging from claims that mummies are too fragile to shifting bureaucratic priorities. None fully explain why requests to analyze already extracted DNA using modern techniques are constantly denied. This chokehold effectively prevents any challenge to the scientifically incomplete narrative that was initially presented. The setbacks reveal a pattern where Egypt prioritizes controlling its cultural heritage narrative over advancing scientific understanding. Every attempt for transparency is met with refusal. By framing genetic research as a political and cultural matter, Egypt ensures that independent voices struggle to be heard. This creates an environment where only approved questions get answers, while the rest remain deliberately silent. Inside this carefully guarded framework exists an individual whose story contradicts the narrow genetic profile Egypt promotes, a man whose origins could alter everything understood about the royal bloodline. The mysterious role of Yuya. Yuya was never a pharaoh. He did not lead armies or commission grand monuments with his name inscribed for eternity. Yet his DNA occupies a central position in the genealogy of Egypt's most influential royal dynasty. Discovered in 1905, Yuya's tomb and mummy shocked archaeologists with their wealth and exceptional preservation. His face remained remarkably intact, revealing features that stood apart from other known royal mummies. From the beginning, experts noted that Yuya's skull shape, facial bone structure, and even hair texture differed from typical native Egyptians of the 18th dynasty. Early observers labeled his traits as foreign, although today's Egyptologists avoid using that language, likely due to political sensitivities. Still, the mystery of his origins lingers unresolved because his genetic profile does not neatly align with Egypt's traditional narrative. Yuya's significance deepens when examining his family ties. His daughter, Tiye, married Amenhotep III, one of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs, making Uyar the grandfather to Akhenaten and great-grandfather to Tutankhamun. His bloodline didn't just intersect royalty, it became its foundation. Because he came from outside the established royal heritage, researchers looked at his DNA as a key to uncovering hidden foreign influences in Egyptian royalty. Yet, the 2010 study barely touched on Uyar's own ancestry. While confirming his relationship to Tutankhamun through the maternal line, it deliberately avoided exploring what his DNA revealed about his broader origins. This omission was no accident. Uyar's genetic markers suggested connections more common among populations in the Levant and Mesopotamia than among Nile Valley natives. Such findings would have required the very population comparisons Egypt refused to permit.
It's missing.
It's long gone and has been put back together to give the shape that you'd expect.
Some independent researchers who have examined the limited data hint at troubling implications. If Uyar carried substantial foreign ancestry, then so did every descendant in his line, including some of Egypt's most famous and controversial pharaohs. This possibility challenges the idea of a purely Egyptian royal bloodline and opens doors to understanding complex regional interactions and migrations during ancient times. Despite these clues, Egypt's control over the data means these insights lack official confirmation. The story of Uyar reminds us that the genetic history of Egypt's greatest dynasty is far from settled, woven with threads that traverse beyond the Nile Valley, crossing into realities the official narrative has long avoided acknowledging. That hidden thread of foreign ancestry only deepens when confronting the enigmatic figure of Akhenaten, whose radical reign and controversial legacy continue to puzzle historians and geneticists alike. The DNA, samples and stories behind these royal mummies hold secrets Egypt tightly guards, and the truth rests just beyond reach, waiting for the day science is allowed to speak freely. Akhenaten's enigmatic legacy. Akhenaten remains one of the most controversial and enigmatic figures in Egyptian history. His reign was brief but radically transformative, as he abandoned the traditional pantheon of Egyptian gods in favor of a monotheistic worship of Aten, the sun disk. This religious revolution challenged centuries of established belief and power structures, leading to a swift and violent rejection after his death. Yet Akhenaten's legacy extends beyond his spiritual changes into the realm of genetics and identity, where mysteries deepen. The mummy identified as Akhenaten, known as K555, has perplexed researchers for over a century. Discovered in 1907, the bones were damaged and poorly preserved, complicating efforts to confirm the body's identity. Early examinations estimated the remains belonged to a young man in his early 20s, far too young to align with the historical record of Akhenaten, who ruled for over 17 years and fathered several children. These discrepancies fueled decades of debate over whether KV55 was actually Akhenaten, a co-regent named Smenkhkare, or someone else entirely. In 2010, the limited DNA study declared the mystery settled by identifying KV55 as Tutankhamun's father, which logically implied the mummy was Akhenaten. Despite this claim, newer investigations using advanced forensic methods have produced conflicting age estimates for the remains, some suggesting the individual may have been in his 40s, while others insist on a younger age. To this day, no consensus has been reached, and Egypt has quietly shifted its narrative whenever contradictions arise, instead of openly addressing the doubt.
Look at the legs.
Physically, Akhenaten diverged sharply from other Egyptian rulers, as reflected in art depicting him with an elongated skull, broad hips, and pronounced belly. Some scholars argue these features were symbolic or stylistic, part of an artistic expression linked to his religious ideology. Others suggest they could reflect real physical abnormalities, possibly of genetic origin. The 2010 DNA analysis noted inherited conditions in the royal family, but fell short of explaining why Akhenaten appeared so different from his father, Amenhotep III. This biological distinctiveness intertwines with the political and cultural upheaval Akhenaten instigated. His religious reforms were extraordinary and ultimately rejected by the very society he governed, leading to his erasure from official history, the chipping away of his name from monuments, and the abandonment of his capital city. His burial in a hastily reused tomb with damaged inscriptions further underscores how thoroughly his successors sought to forget him. Some researchers quietly speculate that Akhenaten's rise and radical changes hint at ancestral influences beyond native Egypt. Connections through his grandmother, Mutemwiya, or great-grandfather Yuya, point toward a lineage that may not have been entirely Egyptian. However, Egypt strongly rejects this interpretation, insisting that Akhenaten was fully Egyptian, with his eccentricities confined to religious vision and artistic style. Unusual, yes, but not foreign. Yet the question remains, why did Akhenaten's successors go to such lengths to erase him? What was so unacceptable in his bloodline or beliefs that forced his name to vanish from history? These unanswered questions hint at a past more complex and contested than official narratives suggest, where genetics and identity play an uneasy role. The complicated life and legacy of Akhenaten sets the stage to consider another crucial element in the story: the foreign queens Egypt admits to, yet refuses to study genetically. Diplomatic marriages and hidden ancestry. The official history of Egypt tells about how the pharaohs made alliances with the help of marriage, and how such marriages linked the Egyptian dynasty with great powers such as the Mitanni, Babylon, and the Hittites. Pharaohs and foreign brides made peace and ruled over the ancient world through these unions of marriage, which they ruled over, and thus did not just get engaged in matters of marriage, symbolic of the time. Foreigners caught up in power started as little girls in the Egyptian royal household, and thus had their say in the throne succession for the next generations. Evidence comes from various documents, like temple inscriptions and letters found that were penned during that time. The kings of Egypt, such as Amenhotep III, used to marry princesses of Mitanni, while others like Thutmose IV and Ramesses II had wives from other nations. These women were highly regarded socially and politically, therefore. The foreign blood was becoming more and more integrated into the Egyptian aristocracy. The process of the integration of the foreign blood into the rulership of Egypt is nicely displayed in museums and made visible through the chronological timelines. Nevertheless, when the discussion turns from political alliances to genetic, the narrative of Egypt undergoes a drastic change. All of a sudden, these marriages between diplomats are being narrated as of no cultural or biological significance, or worse still, as having no impact at all on the gene pool. The official stance is that the foreign queens did not have any real genetic influence on the native population, and therefore the royal lineage remained pure and exclusively Egyptian in character. This stance defies biological reality. If a princess from Mitanni or the Hittite lands married a pharaoh and had children who ascended to the throne, her DNA inevitably flowed into Egypt's royal lineage. The science is straightforward. Biological inheritance doesn't recognize cultural distinctions or political convenience. Given the frequency of these marriages across centuries, foreign genetic markers should be clearly visible in the royal mummies. But the government of Egypt has continually resisted carrying out the genetic ancestry tests that would unveil the relationship. The attempts of the international scientists to investigate the mummies using either the old technologies or the new ones have been met with rejection every time. The arguments that were stated include the preservation of cultural heritage as the major reason, and political sensitivity and misinterpretation fears as minor reasons. However, none of the reasons hold completely upon inspection. The barriers to this truth are not just scientific, but profoundly political, shaping who gets to tell history and what remains hidden. The politics behind scientific silence. Egypt's stringent regulation of its royal mummies, along with their genetic secrets, is not merely confined to archaeology or science. It is a plan that involves the government from the very start to impose a national narrative. After the DNA study of 2010, dozens of international researchers have put forward requests for retesting the royal remains using the latest technology, along with each request being consistently turned down. The whole process of issuing new discoveries has been put to a stop as access to samples, raw data, or independent verification remains off-limit. The official justifications for this resistance change according to the political situation or the requester's origin. At times, Egypt asserts the mummies are too delicate for further testing, even though the DNA extraction procedure of today requires only a tiny, non-damaging sample. At other instances, concerns over the culture are addressed, arguing that testing in addition to the already existing testing would be pulling down the burial places of these ancient people. This line goes against the fact that these mummies are already being exhibited under glass for thousands of visitors every day, and consequently, the notion that scientific examination would be a disrespectful act is weakened. Another frequently utilized explanation is that the genetic material is the exclusive property of Egypt, since it is part of the national heritage, and therefore, transferring samples or data outside the country would be an act of giving up one's sovereignty. This framing transforms a scientific investigation into a political argument where openness turns out to be a disadvantage rather than a benefit. This results in a situation where only the narratives that are accepted are told, while the inconvenient truths are hidden away in the archive drawers. The given behavior greatly affects the worldwide scientific community and vice versa. One of the main principles of reputable science is the process of independent verification and peer review. If a government, whose narrative interest is the opposite of the scientific one, controls all the data and samples, then the purity of scientific objectivity is completely compromised. The researchers pushing for more transparency have to bear the risk of losing their entire access to the archaeological sites in Egypt, thus putting a stop to the collaboration and critical inquiry. The impact of the situation is not only felt in the DNA research, but also in other areas. The scientists who were once the strongest proponents of the need for more comprehensive population studies have, as a matter of fact, withdrawn from public discourse, moving on to less controversial subjects like the study of burial practices or the conservation of artifacts. This kind of self-censorship is nothing but a means of survival in a system where access to resources and career prospects are conditioned by one's political compliance. The royal mummies of Egypt guard secrets more profound than we've ever imagined, hidden behind decades of silence and control. Genetics offers a window to truths that could reshape our understanding of ancient Egypt, but only if those in power let science speak freely. If you found this exploration eye-opening, please like and subscribe to join us as we uncover more mysteries from our past.